For some reason, the protagonist of this story, Rest Albion, had been reincarnated into the world of the game he had played so many times in his previous life. In that game, Rest wasn't the hero, but a villainous nobleman destined to die halfway through the story. For the first few years after his reincarnation, Rest led a fairly normal life. It was only during a special ritual on his 14th birthday that he regained her memories. This event was known as the Divine Oracle Ceremony, where young people received a skill bestowed by the goddess. On that occasion, Rest received a skill called Taming, considered by the people to be one of the most useless, as it only served to control horses, pigeons, or other similar animals. The news enraged his father. The Albion family had been renowned for generations as the cradle of great swordsmen, so he expected his son to possess a combat skill, something like a sword saint or some outstanding martial art. But seeing that Rest only possessed a useless gift, he didn't hesitate to scorn him, deeming him unworthy of the Albion name. His older brothers were quick to mock him, belittling and insulting him for his lack of courage. Both were vying for the title, and the existence of an incapable brother only intensified their dispute. The priest in charge of the ceremony, noticing the humiliation, tried to encourage Rest, assuring him that there must be a greater reason behind this gift. It was then that Rest remembered the truth. He was inside Symphony of Sword and Sorcery, the game he used to complete in his past life. The most surprising thing was that he hadn't reincarnated as the protagonist, but as the secondary antagonist, the one who would die at the hands of a commander in the Demon King's army. As a veteran player, he knew full well that regardless of the route, that fate was unavoidable. After the ceremony, he began to review everything he knew about the game. Taming, though considered useless by everyone, actually held a secret. It allowed him to control not only animals but also monsters. In the original story, Rest discovered this power far too late. By then, years of hatred and persecution had corrupted his heart, and he ended up using his ability to cause harm. This abuse drew the attention of the Demon King's army, who eventually stripped him of his power and killed him. Aware of this, Rest understood that even if he tried to avoid tragedy, as long as he possessed that ability, he would always be hunted, but with his memories as a player. He was determined to break the flag of death. If he grew old enough, he planned to take control of the country with his own hands. He had 1 year left before the game's storyline began, so he intended to make the most of it to change his destiny. The first obstacle was his own family. During a dinner party, his twin brothers Edward and Sidward were showing off in front of their father, the Marquis Gad Albion. The mother, proud of her 2 older sons, didn't hesitate to call Rest a disgrace for his garbage skills. The twins ridiculed him, saying that if he had been born into a family of cattle herders, his skill would have been useful. When Rest tried to defend himself, their father scornfully told him to shut up. Faced with such a hostile atmosphere, the boy decided to go for a walk. A week had passed since he regained his memories. Although he couldn't check his stats like in the game, he soon understood that this world followed the same mechanics. He had to defeat monsters to become stronger. Furthermore, he could only tame creatures he personally defeated, so if he wanted to control powerful monsters, he had to improve his own attributes first. He then recalled the game's daily event called Midnight Training, a practice that enhanced specific skills. Here, however, he wasn't limited to a single session or nighttime hours, allowing him to train relentlessly and grow at an incredible rate. His training wouldn't be limited to physical strength alone. He also intended to perfect his magic. Thanks to the memories of his life in that world, he managed to complete his first magic refinement session without difficulty. He even noticed that his body was already superior to average, which showed that he had trained hard up to that point. Perhaps in the game, the despair after receiving that useless ability was what drove him to push himself even harder. After a day of practice, he began his journey back to the mansion. On the way, he ran into his brothers who were heading to sword training. As usual, they heckled him with taunts. Edward possessed the skill of a great swordsman, and Sidward was a dual-wielding master, so they looked down on their younger brother. It was in the middle of that scene that a young woman appeared, surprising everyone. Elna, the twins' personal trainer, was carrying nothing less than a giant earth dragon that she claimed to have defeated on her way there. Although she was only 18 years old, Elna already held the S rank of adventurer and was known as a swordsman. However, Rest knew nothing about her, as she didn't appear in the game. The only thing he knew about the young woman came from his own memories as Rest. In the game, S-rank adventurers were relatively common, but seeing her in person was overwhelming. Witnessing how incredible Elna was, Rest couldn't help but feel jealous and frustrated at not being able to train under someone like her. 2 hours later in the Albion family's grand training hall, Elna was putting the twins through their paces with brutal intensity. As they strained, Rest hid to observe more of their skills. Just as he had expected, Elna was a formidable warrior. Watching her treat two expert swordsmen like children left him utterly astonished. Exhausted, the twins finally gave up. Witnessing this, Rest realized that while he could boost his stats with training, he would never learn true combat techniques on his own. Since Elna only visited the Albion mansion once a month, he couldn't let this opportunity slip by. He had to ask her to train him too. But before he dared to speak to her, Elna had already noticed him. With the agility of a shadow, she appeared behind him without him noticing. Rest introduced himself and she immediately recognized who he was. A little nervous but determined, he mustered his courage and confessed that he too wanted to become strong. He asked her to teach him how to fight with a sword. However, she immediately clarified that his skill wasn't combat-related, which was why he hadn't been selected as her pupil. Elna agreed that without a sword-related skill, Rest wouldn't survive her regime. Even so, the determination in the boy's eyes made her accept his request. Quick as lightning, she handed him a wooden sword to test him. Elna wanted to know if he was truly worth training, and to prove it, she had to face him directly. Every movement the young woman made was swift and powerful, making it clear she was in a different league. Though he tried to hold back, Rest understood that one slip-up would be enough to knock him unconscious. Try as he might, he couldn't withstand her strength. After more than 10 minutes of fighting, his legs could no longer support him. Seeing his exhaustion, Elna stopped the fight and listened to his request for her critique. She was honest. His physical capabilities were barely adequate, and his swordsmanship was that of an absolute beginner. Even so, she wanted to know why he so desperately craved power. Did he want to master the sword, surpass his brothers, or was there another reason? With conviction, Rest stated that he did it because he wished to defy fate itself. The answer surprised Elna, for she had never seen such determination in any of her students. Therefore, she decided to grant him 30 minutes of personal training each time he visited the mansion. However, she warned him that if she ever saw him slacking off, she would abandon him without hesitation. Rest, convinced, promised he would never give her any reason to do so. Since he wouldn't see her again for a month, he had to train on his own until her next visit. 2 months passed, and it was now the third day of Rest's training with Elna. At first, she thought he hadn't made any progress, as his movements remained predictable. But to her surprise, Rest had developed what he called techniques, something none of his other students had ever shown her. In the game, techniques were as important as skills, or even more so. They were culminating moves that allowed one to surpass their own limits. By that time, Rest had managed to learn a high-speed, high-powered slash called One Flash. For the first time in her career as a teacher, she faced a student capable of getting close enough to strike her. Although she was still much stronger and blocked the attack with ease, she was speechless at Rest's astonishing progress. He'd only been practicing fencing for 2 months, and was already almost at the level of his brothers, who had a 6-month head start. The intensity of his training, made of blood, sweat, and tears, was evident, but even that didn't fully explain his progress. Furthermore, the One Flash technique was designed for swordsmen. Even with talent, anyone without combat training would have taken at least a year to master it. Rest had achieved it in just 2 months, leading Elna to wonder if she was training a true prodigy, a diamond in the rough beyond imagination. Meanwhile, although Rest felt frustrated at not having been able to touch her even once, he also felt fortunate. Thanks to Elna, he had improved more than he could ever have hoped. So far, everything was going according to plan, and he thought that if he was careful not to run into the protagonist or the characters destined to be his enemies, he would be able to defy and overcome his own destiny. Suddenly, his father, the Marquis, informed him that Charlotte, the second princess, would be visiting his mansion. Rest tried to remember who that character was until it dawned on him. She was the game's main heroine, the second princess of the Final Kingdom, and to him, a walking death flag. If he had to describe her in one sentence, she would be the perfect princess in every way. Like any young woman of royal blood, she was curious about the world and made friends easily. She had a pure heart and was considerate of everyone, regardless of their social status. Even with her extraordinary talents, she trained constantly, driven by a strong sense of justice and a desire to protect her people. Precisely because of this, she could not forgive the actions of the rest that harmed others. Therefore, as the story unfolded, Charlotte ended up allying herself with the protagonist to confront him. As a consequence of that battle, Rest died at the hands of an executive of the Demon Lord. However, according to the original story, there shouldn't have been any connection between him and Charlotte at that point, so he wondered why the plot had changed. The answer lay with Elna, who is also the royal family's fencing instructor. She had mentioned to Her Highness a talented swordsman from the Albion family, which piqued Charlotte's curiosity and motivated her to meet him in person. The Marquis and his wife, convinced it was the twins, celebrated the news, unaware that it was actually Rest who had captured the princess's interest. Realizing he had altered the course of the game, Rest began to think about how to fix it. 2 weeks later, the day of the official visit arrived. Rest, along with his brothers, awaited the princess's arrival. However, the twins ordered him to step aside, convinced that she was interested in them. Without arguing, Rest withdrew immediately. While the twins tended to Charlotte, he planned to use his time to train by fighting monsters. The Arst Forest was a dangerous habitat that stretched across Albion territory, and entry was forbidden until one entered the Royal Academy. Not wanting to draw too much attention to him just yet, he decided to postpone the idea. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Charlotte had already arrived and was enjoying tea with the twins and the Marquis. Besides her radiant beauty, the twins were impressed by her Holy Sword Princess, an elite technique that enhanced both holy magic and swordsmanship, even surpassing the sword saint's skill his older brother possessed at the academy. Fascinated, the princess asked to see them fight. The twins happily agreed and a duel began. To their surprise, Charlotte wasn't very impressed as their skills weren't anything exceptional. Fearing they would lose her interest, they decided to demonstrate a real fight by battling monsters in the Arst Forest. Charlotte was stunned. She knew the twins' strength wasn't yet enough to face those creatures, but they, blinded by their confidence, assured her they could. She hesitated to allow it, but in the end she had no choice but to accompany them. Moments later, Charlotte, her twin hosts, and her personal assistant, Estella, entered the forest. The tension was palpable. The princess was sweating slightly as she surveyed the dark surroundings, despite it being broad daylight. The twins, smiling, tried to reassure her, saying they had everything under control. Midway through the tour, the princess remembered that the twins had another brother her own age and asked about him. The twins exchanged uneasy glances and lied, claiming Rest had gone out alone, implying he wasn't worth getting to know due to his mediocre abilities. At that moment, a Grey Wolves group, E-rank monsters, suddenly appeared and attacked them. The twins reacted quickly and managed to defeat it, but the princess noticed their skills weren't as remarkable as they seemed. Estella, however, sensed something unsettling and warned that it was best to retreat immediately. At her insistence, Charlotte asked why, and her assistant explained that she felt imminent danger. The twins, determined to impress, refused to leave and continued on. It wasn't long before an even more formidable enemy appeared, a new category C-rank Gale wolf, far more dangerous than the previous one. The beast charged at great speed, and Estella intervened immediately, blocking its first attack. She ordered the twins to grab the princess and flee. They obeyed, but during their escape, another wolf cut them off, cornering them. With no other option, Charlotte was forced to use her magic, while the twins could barely stand, unable to land a decisive blow. Despite her efforts, the overwhelming strength of the Gale wolf began to wear her down, putting her in a critical situation. Just as the creature was about to deliver a fatal blow, help appeared. Rest intervened, completely blocking the monster's attack and saving the princess from certain death. A few minutes earlier, Rest had noticed Princess Charlotte, along with her maid Estella, venturing into the Arst Forest, accompanied by his siblings. Without hesitation, he ran after them, aware of how dangerous that forbidden place was. Realizing that his brothers were there only to impress the princess, he sped up even more, determined to arrive on time. As the group walked through the forest, he remained hidden in the shadows, leaping from tree to tree, secretly keeping watch. Although most of the forest creatures were low-ranking and the twins could handle them, if they encountered a powerful enemy and Charlotte was injured or worse, killed. It wouldn't be surprising if the entire Albion family ended up executed. Therefore, Rest swore to follow them at all costs, and just as he suspected, his instincts were right. Back in the present, Rest intervened just in time to protect the princess from the attack. It was a close call, so close that he himself was nearly killed by the beast. However, he breathed a sigh of relief that he had arrived in time, otherwise Charlotte would already be seriously injured. Seeing him appear suddenly, Charlotte asked him who he was. At that moment, Rest remembered he was supposed to introduce himself, though he had no intention of meeting her yet. Trapped by his brother's ineptitude, he'd been forced into this situation. Even so, he wished to keep his identity hidden. Instead of giving his name, he said he was just a passerby. Charlotte couldn't believe it. It was impossible for an ordinary person to be strolling in such a dangerous place. She wanted to ask him more questions, but Rest urged her to postpone the conversation as he had to deal with the beast first. She understood immediately. The Gale Wolf was a C-rank monster capable of freely manipulating wind magic, making it a formidable opponent. Even with his current strength, Rest knew that facing him head-on gave him only a 40 or 50% chance of winning. Still, he trusted his acquired knowledge of the game and remained optimistic that he could defeat him. The monster launched another attack, which Rest dodged, positioning himself in front of Charlotte to protect her. However, the fight was difficult. The creature had a varied repertoire of attacks with hardly any openings. Whether up close or at a distance, Rest struggled to counterattack, and with good reason. Gale wolves were renowned for their lethal balance of offense and defense, but Rest was no ordinary person. As a seasoned player of the original game, he knew the monster's attack pattern inside and out. Thanks to this, he managed to land a precise blow, leaving Charlotte, who was watching from the sidelines, stunned. The princess began to wonder who this man was. Although the wolf's physical and magical abilities weren't much different from her own, Rest managed to strike the beast again and again in a way that even she couldn't match. She then recalled her rigorous training with Elna. Since obtaining the title of Princess of the Holy Sword, she had pushed herself harder than ever, aware that there were others with sword and magic skills superior to her own. For this reason, she allowed herself no rest or defeat against others. Elna always motivated her, but also warned her that not all rivals possessed great abilities. She told her about someone like Rest, a young man without exceptional gifts, but who, thanks to his talent and effort, had attained a power capable of rivaling her own. On that occasion, Elna revealed that this boy belonged to the Albion family and was the same age as her. Although Charlotte hadn't planned to visit that house, when her teacher suggested meeting him as an incentive to improve herself, her curiosity was immediately piqued. Now seeing with her own eyes how Rest fought against such a powerful creature, Charlotte understood that the young man Elna had spoken of was him. And although his innate ability was considered useless, she was facing a genius who defied all standards. Hypnotized by his skill, Charlotte could barely react when he took the final initiative. The monster, exhausted of magical energy, changed its target and tried to lunge at her. In a flash, Rest intercepted it, and using his one-flash technique, crushed the beast's head with his sword. What would have been an arduous battle for anyone else, he resolved with such ease that it left even Charlotte, one of the strongest skill wielders in the kingdom, speechless. However, Rest didn't celebrate the victory. He knew it was too soon because for someone like him, a tamer, the real test was just beginning. With the Gale Wolf finally defeated, Charlotte stepped forward and thanked Rest for saving her. Hearing the princess call his name left him speechless, for he never imagined she knew him. When he asked her how she knew, Charlotte didn't answer directly. Instead, she mentioned that she possessed the same wooden sword he was holding, a gift Elna had given them both separately. To formalize the meeting, Charlotte introduced herself as the Princess of the Final Kingdom, and informed him that she too was a student of the same sword master as him. To his surprise, the princess didn't hesitate to bow before him and express her deepest gratitude for his protection until the very end. She also confessed that both his bravery and his skill with the sword had deeply moved her. Rest tried to downplay it, pretending that what he had done was nothing extraordinary, but the princess continued to thank him. Her wide smile startled him, and before she could notice he was blushing, Rest excused himself, saying he had to check on the Gale Wolf. He also took the opportunity to ask the princess to look after her siblings. Meanwhile, Charlotte readily agreed, and as Rest approached the monster, he realized it was at least 20 times his size. Since everything had gone well up to that point, all that remained was to see if the beast would agree to serve him. Checking his panel, he was surprised to read that the Gale Wolf had recognized his strength and was willing to obey him. Without hesitation, Rest accepted and pressed yes. Excited to have tamed his first monster, he gently stroked its fur. Moments later, the system informed him that the process had been successful and that a portion of the beast's power now belonged to him. In this way, Rest had acquired wind magic. As an added reward, he unlocked the extra-dimensional residence for his first successful taming. Feeling the energy coursing through him, Rest understood in that instant why his in-game version believed he could become the strongest. It wasn't just about controlling monsters. His ability allowed him to absorb some of their physical capabilities and even their unique techniques. In this case, he had inherited wind magic. In the game, that power had consumed him to the point of ruin, but this time it was different. He had trained hard, sought Elna's advice, and perfected his sword. Now he wasn't going to waste any of that. His goal would be to tame more creatures because the more he tamed, the stronger he would become. Convinced he was on his way to becoming the strongest in the world, he decided to give his new creature a name. He chose something simple, Gale. However, aware of how strange it would be to have such a pet, he resolved to keep its existence a secret. To test his new ability, he used the extra-dimensional residence and hid the wolf there. Moments later, Estella appeared, running toward the princess, worried about her well-being. Charlotte, who was with the twins, smiled at her and told her that another Gale wolf had appeared, but they had managed to repel it. Estella was astonished and asked if it had been the princess who had faced it or if the boys had protected her. Proudly, Charlotte revealed that it was Rest who had saved her. Stella couldn't believe it. Rest was known for his useless abilities, but Charlotte insisted that she had seen it with her own eyes without a doubt. Faced with that, Rest had no choice but to admit it and explain that it had been a tough battle, but that he had ultimately won. Estella thanked him sincerely and promised to find a way to repay him properly. At that moment, Rest realized he needed to be much more careful when interacting with the game's characters, or he could get into serious trouble. Even so, he entrusted Charlotte and Estella with getting their siblings out of the forest before another threat appeared.